The day they served Yvonne Ellis with divorce papers, her husband and her brother were already celebrating. They had booked a table at the steakhouse downtown, the expensive one, the one Yvonne's money had paid for 100 times. They ordered the good wine, and they toasted, quietly, to a plan 3 years in the making. To take the fortune Yvonne had spent 30 years building, and to leave her with almost nothing. They thought it was the smartest thing either of them had ever done. It was, in fact, the worst mistake of both their lives. They just didn't know it yet, because the two men laughing over steak that night had made the same error everyone had been making about Yvonne Ellis for 30 years. They had mistaken quiet for weak. Before we go any further, if stories like this one tend to stay with you, take a moment to subscribe so the next one finds you. And tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. It always means more than you know to see how far these stories travel. You have to understand who Yvonne actually was, or the ending won't satisfy you the way it should. 30 years earlier, Yvonne and her husband Vaughn had started with nothing but one small property and a loan. Vaughn was the charm. He was the handshake, the smile, the man who could talk anyone into anything. At every party, at every closing, Vaughn was the face of the Ellis fortune, and he loved it. And Yvonne? Yvonne was the one in the back office. The one who read every contract line by line. The one who understood the financing, the ownership, the structure. The boring machinery that actually holds an empire together. While Vaughn shook the hands, Yvonne built the thing the hands were shaking on. He used to wave it off in front of guests. Yvonne handles all the boring paperwork, he'd say, with a little laugh. I don't even read what I sign. That's what I've got her for. He thought he was complimenting her. He had no idea he was confessing. Remember that. He didn't read what he signed. For 30 years. Now, the betrayal. And it was worse than a simple affair. Vaughn had decided he was done. There was a younger woman. Yes, there usually is. But more than that, Vaughn had simply grown to resent the wife who knew exactly how much of the empire was actually her doing. So he decided to leave, and to take everything on his way out. But Vaughn wasn't smart enough to do it alone. He needed someone on the inside. Someone who understood the company's accounts. Someone Yvonne trusted completely. He found him in Yvonne's own brother. Desmond, her little brother. The boy she had helped raise, the man she had pulled into the business years ago when he was broke, given a title, a salary, a seat at the table, because that is what you do for blood. Desmond knew where things were. And Desmond, it turned out, had spent years quietly resenting the sister who'd had to rescue him, and was more than willing to trade her for a cut. Together, Vaughn and Desmond began to hide the fortune. They moved money into accounts they thought Yvonne couldn't see. They quietly retitled assets. They built, over 3 patient years, a version of the Ellis empire designed to look small and broke and worthless, so that when the divorce came, there would be almost nothing for Yvonne to claim, and the real fortune would be split 2 ways at that steakhouse table. Betrayed by her husband was a wound. Betrayed by her brother was something else. That one went all the way to the bone. The papers came on a Tuesday. Cold, formal, blindsiding, exactly as they'd planned. A lowball settlement offer. A thick stack of documents showing a company drowning in debt, assets gone, nothing left to fight over. The message underneath it was clear. Take the scraps, Yvonne, and be grateful. You were only ever the wife. Vaughn expected her to cry, to rage, to crumble. Yvonne read the entire stack, slowly, the way she read everything. And then she did something that should have terrified both of them. She smiled. Here is what Vaughn and Desmond had forgotten. What they had never bothered to learn, because learning it was boring, and they had Yvonne for the boring parts. Yvonne hadn't just kept the books. 30 years ago, when the company was small and Vaughn couldn't be bothered, Yvonne had built the ownership structure of the entire enterprise herself. The holding company that sat above everything. The trust beneath that. The shareholder agreements every entity was bound by. And she had not built it to be fair. She had built it to be safe. Because Yvonne had watched her own mother, decades before, get left with nothing by a charming man, and had sworn it would never, ever happen to her. Every asset Vaughn and Desmond thought they were cleverly hiding sat inside structures that Yvonne controlled. The accounts they'd moved money into rolled up, 3 layers later, to a holding company in her name. The shares Desmond thought made him a player were non-voting, a title she'd given him to be kind, with no teeth, because even years ago some quiet instinct had told her not to hand her brother the keys. Vaughn had spent 3 years hiding the fortune. He had been hiding it inside a house that belonged to Yvonne, and the documents he hadn't read for 30 years were the ones he'd signed agreeing to all of it. But that wasn't even the part that finished them. Because while the two men spent 3 years building their scheme, Yvonne, quiet, underestimated, always watching, had noticed. Of course she had. She noticed everything. She had seen the money move. She had seen her brother's sudden interest in accounts that weren't his business. And she had done what she always did. She had documented it. Every transfer, every retitled asset, every quiet, illegal step the two of them took to defraud her. A patient, dated, airtight record. She didn't need to scheme. She didn't need revenge. She just needed to let 2 greedy men finish building the rope, and then hand it, neatly labeled, to the right people. The reckoning did not happen at the steakhouse. It happened in a conference room, where Vaughn and Desmond arrived expecting to finalize their victory, and where Yvonne's attorney slid a different stack of documents across the table. The ownership structure, her name on all of it, and beneath that, the record of their fraud, the hidden transfers, the retitled assets, everything the two of them had done, laid out in Yvonne's careful, dated hand. The color drained out of both men at almost exactly the same moment. Vaughn, who had never in his life read what he signed, finally understood what he had been signing. And Desmond looked at his sister with the face of a man realizing he had just bet his entire life, and his only family, on the belief that she was stupid. She wasn't stupid. She had never been stupid. She had just been kind, for a very long time, to people who mistook her kindness for blindness. Yvonne kept the fortune. All of it. The structure she'd built 30 years ago held like iron. Vaughn walked away with the debt they'd manufactured to fool her. Every worthless, hollowed-out shell company they'd created to hide the money, now legally his, and only his. The younger woman did not stay long after that, and Desmond got exactly what his non-voting shares entitled him to, which was nothing. The fraud he'd helped commit saw to the rest. That was the last laugh. And by every measure that the world counts, Yvonne won completely. But I want to be honest with you about the cost, because Yvonne was. She told a friend, much later, that she would have handed Vaughn half the fortune and called it the price of being free of him. Money she could always rebuild. She'd proven that once already. It was Desmond she couldn't get back. Her brother. The boy she'd raised. The man she'd rescued. The blood she'd have protected with her life. Who had looked at 30 years of her love and decided it was worth less to him than a cut of her money. She kept the empire. She lost her brother. And she was clear-eyed enough to know which of those was the real loss. So here's what this one leaves you with. The people who underestimate you are telling you something true about themselves, that they have never once bothered to actually look at you. Let them keep believing it. Quiet is not weak. Kind is not blind. And the person doing the boring, patient, unglamorous work in the back of the room is very often the only one who actually understands where all the power is kept. They thought they'd taken everything from Yvonne Ellis. They forgot she was the one who built the place it was all hidden in. If this one stayed with you tonight, don't let it leave alone. Subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, and about a time someone underestimated you and learned better. I read every single one. Some stories never leave.